I am not a Native American, but I have worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation as a school teacher on several different occasions. As a lifelong resident of New Mexico, I have driven hundreds of thousands of miles, with tens of thousands of those miles at night. I consider myself a very experienced nighttime driver, where I have seen just about every type of mammal and animal, both wild and domestic, that New Mexico has to offer. When I first started working, I was making a home visit to one of my students. His name was Billy. Billy was a very intelligent boy with a higher than average IQ. He told me on that visit that their neighbor was a Skinwalker. I scoffed at Billy and said something like, "There's no such thing." But Billy insisted, saying that the neighbor changed into an animal and came to their house and looked into their windows. This was all very interesting to me, but I pretty much forgot about what he said. A few years later, I started teaching astronomy. The class would end around 10 p.m. and I would head back home, about 20 miles west. One night after class, about 10:30, sometime in the spring, I was driving home on a tribal road. I drove about 50 miles per hour because of the possibility of horses and livestock being on the roadway. I always noted Billy's house off the road at about the halfway point to my home. It was one of those waypoints. I suddenly saw something weird pass from the right to the left side of my front end of my car. This was the strangest creature or object I've ever encountered on that road. It was a large, shapeless hole that did not reflect any light whatsoever. My car's headlights simply disappeared and they were swallowed into darkness of this mass. I saw no definite shape, no legs, no head, no eyes. Just a shapeless, black hole. I remember getting scared and speeding up. When I finally made it back, I got into my apartment as quickly as I could and I locked the door behind me. I then sat in the living room, trying my best to figure out what I saw. The next day I told one of my Navajo friends what I saw. His jaw dropped. He immediately said it was a Skinwalker, but I had nothing to worry about since they can't harm white men. Still, it was weird. I have told this story to several Navajo, and they all pretty much come to the same conclusion, that it was a Skinwalker. Weird stuff for sure. A logical explanation says it was a large black dog or a black bear, but I've never seen anything like it since. As a teenager, I would visit my grandma at her home on the Navajo Res for several weeks every summer. I loved to spend time with her, eat her delicious fried bread, and hear all the stories she used to tell us. Every so often, my grandma would hire a worker, a harmless town drunk, to do odd jobs around her house and property. One evening, right before the sun went down, I was asked by my grandma to take him home, which is about 4 miles away from where she lived. I was more than happy to, seeing that I was only 14 and I was able to drive a truck. Mind you, that on the res, nobody cares that you're only 14 years old and driving around. Heck, there's hardly anyone around to see you anyways. My 9-year-old brother and my dog also jumped in the truck with us. After I dropped the worker off at his shack, we headed down the road to my grandma's. As I mentioned before, it was the evening and the sky was a deep red as the sun began to set behind us. We were leaving a nice dust trail from the dirt road, and the radio was playing music from the only radio station that could be picked up from the nearest town. There was nothing unusual, nothing weird. It was at this time that my eyes caught movement of something in the bushes a little ways up the road. I remember slowing down, thinking that it was one of the many free sheep roaming in the area. Then, out of nowhere, I just felt this dark feeling of fear and dread. I had no idea why I was feeling this way, but I definitely felt that something was wrong. As I play this memory back in my mind, there are only a few clear memories that I have of that evening. I clearly remember looking in my rearview mirror and seeing a dark silhouette of something very tall and very skinny that seemed to be covered with some kind of hair or fur running behind the truck after us. Whatever it wasn't human at all. I remember hearing my brother crying and my dog barking ferociously at whatever it was that was chasing us. I remember speeding up very fast and shaking violently as the truck bounced on the washboard dirt road. I remember distinctly that this thing was only getting closer as my brother cried, "It's coming up on your side!" I remember being as scared as hell and thinking that I didn't want to die. At that moment, I thought that would be our last. I remember speeding around a bend in the road and seeing a car coming towards us in the opposite direction. At that moment, I felt instant relief and felt whatever was following us was gone. Shaken up but alive. We made it to my grandma's house, wondering what the heck just happened. We ran inside, not looking back, hoping that whatever was chasing us did not follow us home. As we told my grandma about the experience, she didn't seem too surprised, which surprised us. She continued by repeating stories that we'd already heard at one point or another about black magic, witches, and something that Navajos called uniglosh, or skinwalkers. Needless to say, I didn't even want to look out of any windows for the rest of that night. As a matter of fact, I never drove on the reservation at night until I was 21 years old. Without going too deep into explanation, I'll just say that these skinwalkers are evil men and spirits that use black magic for evil doing. I'll tell you that as far-fetched as it may sound, they are real. I believe that if God and His greatness are real, the devil is equally as real and also has his ways of showing himself. I live close to the reservation, just outside Mesa, Arizona. I have a couple of native friends who I just recently went camping with to a place they call Three Poles. This place is considered holy land in their eyes and is close to a river. There are numerous stories I know about this place, such as the flute player you can hear at night, or the boulder-sized splashes you'll hear in the river, but most notable are the stories of the skinwalkers. We arrived at the camping site around 9 p.m. It was already dark, so we started to unpack and made a fire. Once that was done, my native buddies put up this barrier and puffed the smoke of tobacco upon us as a personal barrier. They told me never to go anywhere alone, and that around 3 a.m. is when the spirits are most active. Around 2 a.m., the beating of a drum became very clear. This is a sign of a skinwalker, they told me. Around 3 a.m., the smell of a wet dog became apparent. This is the sign of either two things, Hoofy, an extremely evil spirit, or skinwalkers. The fire grew small and we could see the shadows of animals. We all decided to move to another site in the morning. As first light dawned, we packed. I sat in the back of his truck to hold down the stuff. As we left, I saw a Rottweiler walking on its hind legs straight at us. It was easily 5 feet tall and had bright orange eyes. I freaked out and screamed as it was running at us, still standing up. It disappeared into a bush after we turned a corner. Later on at our camp, an old man with his face covered up by his hair visited us and acted very strange. We ran out of drinks, so a friend and I decided to head out on foot. We saw a car. As it approached, it slowed down to a halt, and the same man asked us if we wanted a ride. We said no because by this time my friends had told me that the man was a skinwalker. He had grabbed my arm and pulled me by his car and looked straight at me. As my friend ran up to grab me, the man took off in his car. Once we got back, I relaxed. It was around dawn when just behind me the man appeared about 10 feet away from me and asked if I could help him with something back at his camp. As he did, 2 trucks came around the corner. He watched them as they passed, and then all of a sudden, he bolted after them. I was astonished to see this 60-year-old man chasing down a car. My native friends put up a salt barrier. I heard sounds all night, but I never saw anything after that. When I was a little girl, traveling with my family on vacation, we came across something strange. It was quite a while ago when we'd stopped at a rest stop so my dad could sleep. It doesn't happen often now, but back then a lot of people used to stop and sleep in rest areas. It was in the middle of the night and something startled my father awake. He woke up and was extremely scared and nervous. He was trying to figure out why he'd woken up and why he felt so scared when he saw a man walking across the desert. He said that he almost couldn't take his eyes off of the guy because even though the man was kind of far out there, something was wrong. The man was walking towards the rest area from out in the desert. As he got closer, my father saw that there was something different about him. The man had a fur skin thrown about his shoulders, and as he walked, his feet were not touching the ground. He passed right beside the car and looked at my dad in the eyes. My dad said that all the hair in his body stood up, and he turned on the car and drove away as fast as he could. It was later that we found out that some crazy guy came to that same rest area that same night that we were there and shot a bunch of people. From what I was told, some of the people were killed. I was a little girl then, 3 or 4 years old. Ever since then, me and my family have never stopped at a rest stop. I was a kid when this happened. My uncle and I were finishing up chopping and gathering wood for my grandmother because it was getting dark. This was on the Navajo Res here in Arizona. Driving back on a dirt road about 30 miles per hour, I had this awful sense of being watched. Before I could turn to look out my window, my uncle quickly shouted, "Don't." I completely froze. My heart felt like I was beating out of my chest, then completely stopped when I heard tap, tap on my window. My uncle sped up and was loudly praying in my native language. I didn't know what was going on, and I thought it was over until our truck suddenly dipped from the bed. My uncle then started saying, "Look at me and don't turn away," over and over. Then I heard it again, tap, tap, but from the window behind me. It was getting harder for me to breathe and I wanted to cry. A minute or two passed and the truck dipped again. My uncle looked around and sighed. It was quiet besides the truck and the road. He looked at me and said, "We will ask your father to do a prayer for us in the morning, so the evil will forget our faces." I remember curling up on the seat, just staring at the radio, watching the time, listening to my uncle sing an old prayer till we got to my grandmother's house. I later called my uncle because I had a nightmare about that night. We talked about it for a bit. He said I didn't see faces, just eyes. Just like brake lights you see in the road, it watched you. Before hanging up, I tried joking with him about it. "Why didn't you just step on the brake when it was on our backs?" No laughter, just a pause. Because it wasn't alone. I was heading to a small town in southern Utah with my wife and a couple of friends. We were on our way to see Lee, a friend of mine we hadn't seen for a long time. We met up with him at his place and decided to hang out at a nearby lake. It was a typical quiet campsite with a fire pit and a couple of logs around it. We had a little picnic there and were exchanging stories and catching up with each other all day. Eventually, one of my friends, Bryce, got tired and decided to fall asleep in the car while the rest of us continued talking. At this point, twilight had fallen. Erica and I were discussing something while my wife and Lee were talking about something else. All of a sudden, my wife and Lee fell silent. Erica and I quickly noticed. We looked at them and Lee says, "Get in the car." I asked him, "What's wrong?" And he says, "There might be a skinwalker out here." Now, Erica and I had no idea what a skinwalker was at that time, so we asked him to explain. After his explanation of what it was, Erica and I, being the only sensible thinkers at the moment, and Bryce just barely waking up from his jump scare, decided to go investigate, believing that it was probably just some kids in the nearby campsite trying to mess with us. We came to the top of the hill that was between our campsite and the next, and I looked for any likely candidates for the scare. None. All we could see were a couple of trees and some bushes. We even called out and there were no responses. As we were walking back to the campsite, we heard noises. A rustling in the bushes behind us. We look again, but we see nothing. At this point, we were considering that Lee and my wife might be right. We get back and it's getting dark fast, so I asked them, "Is there something we can do to keep them away for a bit?" "Yes," says Lee. "They don't like fire." Lee, my wife, and Bryce start working on a fire, while me and Erica go down by the lake to collect the 2 liters we had put the water in to keep cold. Now, it's dark, and as Erica and I were heading back with the sodas, we hear rustling in the bushes beside us. We're both scared. We hurry back and start putting everything back in the car as quickly as possible, while Lee made sure the fire kept burning. After getting everything in the car, I rush over to the fire pit and tell everyone to get in the car, as I proceed to stomp the fire out. Right as the fire went out, I heard a blood-curdling scream from across the lake. I felt my heart stop. Lee had said skinwalkers are so fast and they can make a full lap around the lake in a matter of seconds. I jumped in the car and yelled, "Go!" Right as the engine started, the lights came on. We could see it coming out of the bushes in front of us, glowing yellow eyes and what looked like a zombified coyote with decaying flesh. We backed up and peeled out of there as fast as we could. This happened 2 years ago, and it still scares me to know how close I was to death. I honestly was amazed that we all survived such a close encounter with this thing. My experience takes place right in Gallup, on the east side of the city near a small reservation. My best friend visited her sister every weekend. She lived in the low rental apartments on the east side. Right across from these apartments is an elementary school, the one I actually attended when I was a little girl. During those weekends, I would spend the night with my friend at her sister's apartment. When there was absolutely nothing to do and the kids and parents were asleep, we'd go outside to the park located in the middle of the apartments and hang out. One night we became so bored we actually took off walking. I'd say it was about 2 a.m. We were used to being up late and we were wide awake. We walked behind the apartments where there was no light, tons of bushes and prairie dog holes in the ground. As we were walking, I sensed that someone was starting to follow us. I turned around to look and there was nothing there. As I turned to look forward, my friend suddenly grabbed my arm and said in a scared whisper, "Oh my gosh, what was that?" I looked into the darkness and saw nothing. The wind was blowing lightly and there were a few trees ahead of us, so I passed it off as wind moving the leaves. I just told her, "It's just the wind, chill out," and kept walking. But as I looked again, I saw what looked like a black figure moving through the trees. I stopped and said, "I think it might be a drunk crashing out back for the night." Just so I wouldn't scare my friend, I kept a calm voice, which was awfully hard for me to do because I was sensing that this thing in the trees wasn't good. I said, "Do you want to go back home?" And she said, "No, we're almost to the store. Let's just keep going." So as we kept walking, we heard the movements in the trees. We started walking faster. I heard something behind us and I looked, and it was like a wounded dog. I wasn't really scared because where I lived, there were a lot of those. But what I heard next stopped me dead in my tracks and paralyzed me. I heard this dog moan and growl at the same time, as if it was ready to attack. I literally couldn't move, and my friend was trying to distract me, saying, come on, we gotta run." Her screams sounded distant, as if I had gone deaf or if I was far away. I made eye contact with this thing, and I knew that it was a bad move. I closed my eyes and said a short prayer, and without even thinking, I turned around and ran for my life with my friend close by my side. I tried not looking behind us, but something was telling me to look. I glanced behind us, and there was a man running after us. He wasn't just running, he was running on all fours. I screamed and my friend joined in, only because I scared her when I yelled. We finally got to the road where there was light and cars passing. We must have run for about 5 minutes straight when we were completely out of breath. I remember our sides were aching and cramping as we stopped to catch our breath. I turned to look behind us and saw the man in the distant darkness running back to where he'd come from. We walked a few more minutes until we finally reached the store. The lady behind the counter gave us a weird look and asked us, "Are you girls okay?" We replied out of breath, "Yes, just a late night run." I could tell she didn't believe us, so she asked, "Did you girls run from the apartments?" I answered, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Oh, are you girls sure you're okay?" We looked at each other and my friend and I told her, "Well, not really. We just had a horrible encounter with something. We don't know what it was or who it was." The lady just said, "You girls just ran from a skinwalker. Whatever it is always chases someone he catches walking down that road at night. You girls are extremely lucky you made it this far." As if we weren't already shaken up, what she just told us struck us even more. I had heard similar tales from my grandmother. We didn't have any money, but she offered us a bottle of water and a ride back home. She closed down the store and we got into her pickup. As we passed the bushes and trees where we'd previously come from, both of us saw something running. The lady told us to ignore it and to close our eyes. We finally entered the apartment complex and she asked us, "Which one is yours?" I pointed in the direction of our apartment. As we were getting out of the pickup, she told us, "You girls stay home for the night, okay? There's nothing you two girls need to be running around at 2 in the morning for. Keep yourself safe." We nodded and said goodbye and thanked her. After that night, we never left the apartment complex after it turned dark. To this day, I'm still shook up about what we experienced that night, and I still don't really know what it was that chased us. I was about 10 or 11 when I encountered a Skinwalker. My family always had a peyote meeting on Christmas and on New Year's Eve. All my cousins and I were sleeping on my mom's hogan, while most of our parents and guests were in teepees, praying. They said that a man saw something outside the teepee, and he told the fire chief, and he told my uncle. My uncle woke up my older brothers, and they got their guns and our spotlight to look for whatever was creeping around our houses. We lived in a small valley in the highest part of the res, near Pinion. All of a sudden I heard a loud gunshot, my brother's 30-30. It scared the heck out of me since I was fast asleep, but my sister was the only one in the house with us, and she already burned some cedar and said a protection prayer for us. My brothers and one of my cousins were outside shooting at some sort of creature. My niece and I had gotten out of our beds and were watching from the window. They were sure that they shot it a few times, but it would just get up and run off. My mother and father started to smear white ash on the bullets they started shooting, and the creature left our valley. It is very taboo to do any sort of hunting or shooting during a blessing ceremony, but something had to be done. That is as close as I've ever gotten to a Skinwalker that I know of. I saw a Skinwalker around 1993. I was working as a security guard in a hotel in New Mexico. It was a beautiful summer and the nights were warm and comfortable. I always worked the graveyard shift. This hotel was haunted, and I experienced a few things, but nothing prepared me for what I saw that night. It was after midnight, close to 2 a.m., and I was in my car patrolling. I parked under a tree and I guess I semi-drifted off. Suddenly, something struck the bottom of my car with enough force to make it sway. This car was a rather heavy 1978 Thunderbird. I started the car and pulled forward, turning around in the lot. Sitting where I'd been parked was a dog-like thing with an odd face staring me down. I felt a dark energy about it, like it was invading my soul. It had human features, especially the eyes. They had the spark of a human, but they were whole evil. Its face didn't have a long snout. It looked like a human nose, a bit extended, but not a black tip like a dog. As for the size of its body, it was a bit bigger than an adult German Shepherd. Its fur was rather mangy and dirty looking. It was thickly muscled. Looking at this thing gave me the feeling of fear. I hit the gas and tried to hit it with my car. It ran off the property onto a native land across the road. It then ran back across the road onto the hotel property. I made chase. It ran into the third parking lot. It then ran into the area called the ponds, where the weed grows about 8 feet to 9 feet tall. There were 2 large cesspools there, and the area was really filled with weeds. I parked my car and grabbed my pistol and ran out on foot after it. I could hear it move through the weeds. It was circling, trying to come up behind me. Then it rushed and threw me aside like it was built like matchsticks. I felt around and found my pistol and made chase. What ran in on 4 legs ran back out on 2. It looked like a shambling Noon Man-like thing that screamed as it fled. The scream was both human and animal. It was horrifying. The thing ran across the street into a sagebrush and cactus-filled area, in the direction of some houses. I couldn't take a shot. That morning, I told the hotel housekeeper crew what happened. Some of the girls were natives and told me that I indeed saw a Skinwalker. I'm not sure what to make of it. I'm just glad that I'm alive.